I remember taking woodworking in middle school. I wasn't very skilled at it, but I enjoyed the work of it. I remember making this awful chair for my final project in class one year, and it was really rickety, unsturdy. And my grandfather, a master carpenter, took one look at it and decided that he better pass on some of his knowledge to me. So we went into his shop, and he proceeded to take the chair apart and show me how to fix it. I still think about that to this day. I wanted to pass down some of my own knowledge to those that are interested in woodworking. A class that I'm taking at University of Mary Washington has provided me an opportunity as well as the resources to make that happen. So in this video, I will be demonstrating some woodworking projects in the hopes that it will inspire others to learn and create on their own. Selecting the proper lumber for your project is very important. Saving money in the process is equally important. Being able to prep rough cut lumber on your own will save you a lot of money.
We'll need 3 tools to get started today. The first being the table saw. Next, a jointer. And finally, a thickness planer. Be sure to read the safety manuals of all your machines and always wear eye protection. The woods we'll be milling down today are hard maple, purple heart, and some South American babinga. These woods are very hard and have a nice tight grain, which will be ideal for this series of projects.
First, do some research. Identify which species of wood will work best for your project. Here I have decided to use some rough-cut hard maple and South American babinga for a project later in the video. But first we'll mill it down to usable squared-up pieces.
First, we'll use our planer to ensure that one side of our board is completely flat. Don't remove too much wood at once. Try for about 1/16 of an inch with each pass. Next, we'll use our jointer to mill one edge 90 degrees to the side that we just planed. Take off just enough to make the edge flat. Now it's onto the table saw to make the opposite edge parallel to the edge we just jointed. Again, take off just enough to square it up. And then one last strip through the planer to flatten out our last remaining side. After those 4 simple steps, we can see that all of our edges are 90 degrees to one another, and our lumber is ready for use. Now that we know how to mill our lumber, we'll do the same to our remaining pieces as we did to our first piece. And after a little bit of work, you can see we have our purple heart, our maple, and our babinga all milled and squared up and ready to be used on a project.
We're going to start off small with our first project, which will be a wooden wine bottle stopper. These decorative pieces add a unique element to your dinner table by replacing the original cork or screw cap with a hand-turned wooden knob attached to a stainless steel plug. Many different shapes you can have, and they really add a little something.
After selecting our piece of wood, the first thing we're going to do is find and mark the center. Using a punch, we will mark where the drill bit will go. Drilling a hole in our block of wood will enable us to mount it on the lathe. With our bottle blank mounted on the lathe, the first thing we'll do is make it round. Once that is complete, our bottle stopper will begin to take shape. Once our desired shape is obtained, it's on to sanding, starting with a rougher grit and moving on to smoother grits. And then we can finish off with some fine steel wool. Next, a friction wax is applied and buffed into the wood with a soft cloth. All that's left is a quick and easy assembly by screwing the wooden knob onto your metal hardware. Just like that, your stopper is ready for your wine.
Wooden bowls have been around forever, and today we're going to make one of our own. Back in the olden days, folks used to just take a block of wood and carve it out with a stone or a rudimentary blade, but today we're going to use a lathe, and we're going to use a nice piece of sapelli wood to make our bowl. So afterwards, you can go out and find yourself a nice piece of wood and make your own bowl.
As is always the case when working on the lathe, our first step is to find the center. Now we'll mark out our diameter of our bowl so that we can cut it out on the bandsaw. Once we've rounded off our bowl blank, the next step is to cut a tenon in the bottom. This will enable us to mount the bowl blank with the top facing out, allowing us to hollow out the bowl. Now we can mount our bowl with the tenon into our four-jawed chuck. Next, we'll shape our bowl. Some folks like to draw a picture first to show the profile, and others just like to make it up as they go. a quick turn of our tool rest, and we'll begin hollowing out the bowl from the front. Next, it's on to sanding. Much like the bottle stopper before, we're going to make sure we sand off any imperfections on the outside and the inside of the bowl. We'll use 150 grit, 220, and 320 grit sandpaper to complete the job. After applying some friction wax, we'll use our soft cloth to buff it. This self-centering chuck will hold our bowl in place while we put the finishing touches on the bottom. After we turn a decorative trim on the bottom of the bowl, we'll sand, wax, and our bowl is finished.
For our last project of the video, we are going to make a cutting board. And this will get us away from the lathe and onto more traditional woodworking techniques. I've chosen some hard maple and some babinga that we milled earlier, and now we're going to put it to use.
Example of an end grain cutting board. The benefits of end grain versus long grain are that end grain is more forgiving and won't dull your knives as quickly, and it also is less prone to chipping than long grain. If cared for properly, an end grain cutting board will last you many years. We'll make our cutting board out of maple and some of this babinga. Our plans for this cutting board require us to cut 4 pieces of different widths from both the maple and the babinga. When we are finished cutting, we will have a matching pair from each type of wood. We're using this blue feather board to keep our stock tight against our table saw fence. Now that we have the required pieces, we are ready to arrange them in the proper order. It is here where our cutting board will begin to take shape. We start by opposing them to one another with the smallest pieces in the middle and the largest on the outside. Next, we simply alternate them in descending order, interlocking them like fingers. This brings us to the first of 2 glue-ups in this project. The first step is to turn each piece so the joining edge is facing up, like so. Next, apply a liberal amount of glue to each piece. Here we are using Titebond 2, which is very strong and water resistant. Be sure to apply as much glue as needed to ensure even coverage. Next, we'll rejoin each piece, align them properly with a square, and clamp them overnight. We'll also clamp on a couple of cauls to keep our pieces level to one another. I've wrapped the cauls in packing tape to keep the glue from sticking. As you tighten your clamps, you should see the glue begin to seep out from between your joints. This is okay. Don't wipe it off. We'll take care of that later when it dries. After you've waited overnight, it's time to unclamp and move on to the next series of steps. Using a chisel or a metal scraper, we'll now remove the dried glue. It doesn't have to be perfect, just get as much off of it as possible. We want as clean a surface as we can get since we again send it through the planer. And then one last trip through the planer to flatten out our last remaining side. After trimming any uneven ends on the table saw, we'll check the squareness. Now it's time for our second series of cuts, the cross cuts. Continue cutting until all of your material is used. Now for the final arrangement. We'll begin by turning each piece to the side, exposing the end grain of each piece. And this looks pretty good. But we're going to go one step further and flip every other one to achieve our checkerboard design. And now for one last glue up. Using the same process as before, we'll turn our pieces on their sides and apply another liberal amount of glue. This next step is critical. When putting your pieces back together, ensure that your checkerboard is completely lined up. With our final glue up complete, we'll now unclamp and go through our final series of steps. Once again, we're going to chip away any dried glue that has seeped out from between our joints, and then we're going to sand our cutting board to a flat, smooth surface. Using a tack cloth, wipe away any sawdust from the sanding process and ensure a nice clean surface. We'll then treat our cutting board with generic mineral oil, available at any pharmacy. Apply lots of mineral oil to the surface of your cutting board and allow it to seep into the wood until it won't seep in any further. This will protect the cutting board from moisture and splitting. Apply more in the future as needed to keep the cutting board looking like new. Congratulations, you've just made a cutting board. Now wash your hands, because I'm sure someone has some vegetables for you to cut.
Well, that's it for today. We've made a few different pieces and over the course of this video, and all of them have their own little purpose. I hope that you've learned a thing or two about woodworking today, and that it's inspired you to go on out and take on some of your own projects. Tune in next time, where we'll have a new batch of projects, and they'll all prove to be both informative and fun. Until then, thanks for watching.